I joined the Labour Party because of my Jewish values and because of the things that I was taught in my family and in my synagogue. I've been the unfortunate victim of a lot of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party and stuff I never thought I'd receive in 2019, let alone in the party that I thought was anti-racist. Whilst leafleting at a party conference, someone came up and screamed abuse in my face. I wouldn't say to a friend, go to a Labour Party meeting if you're Jewish. I couldn't do that to someone I cared about.
Labour says anti-racism is at its very core. Why then is there a constant stream of anti-Semitism complaints by party members?
Since 2015, it's been soul-destroying being a member of the Labour Party and Jewish members across the Labour Party don't know what to do. No one knows what to do.
Tonight, 8 former Labour insiders break their silence on Mr Corbyn's failure to drive out anti-Semitism.
I am heartbroken and disgusted that the party that I joined over a decade ago is now institutionally racist.
We also reveal new evidence that contradicts what the party leadership has said in public.
The emails that you've shown me are really important. The issues that are raised within them should ring alarm bells across the party.
The idea that I'm some kind of racist or anti-Semitic person is beyond appalling, disgusting and deeply offensive.
Do you think Mr Corbyn is anti-Semitic?
It's still a question I struggle with.
Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you! You're offenders! Shame on you! Shame on you!
Many British Jews once saw the Labour Party as their natural political home. No longer.
Being a bystander who turns their head the other way is not an option. The time for action is now.
They say they're being pushed out of Labour by a left-wing version of the world's oldest form of racism.
Anti-Semitism is prejudice or hostility towards Jewish people. It's anti-Jewish racism, all based on a general suspicion that you can't trust Jewish people, that they're always up to something. And it's usually got something to do with money or with power or with influence.
Labour's anti-Semitism crisis burst into the open in April 2016 with a row in Westminster.
A Nazi apologist. A Nazi apologist. You're a disgusting Nazi apologist, Livingstone.
The former mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, has a history of false claims that Jews were in cahoots with Nazis in establishing Israel.
Let's remember, when Hitler won his election in 1932, his policy then was that Jews should be moved to Israel.
So you had, right up until the start of the Second World War, real collaboration, and everyone who studied history just knows this is true.
In fact, what historians know is that this is a gross misreading of history, one that's deeply offensive to Jews. Inside Labour's London headquarters, called Southside, were the disputes team who police the party's rulebook. Mike Crichton was in overall charge.
People were going ballistic all over the place about what Ken had said, because it's a repeat offender, really.
What do you mean a repeat offender? What do you mean by that?
Well, it's not the first time that he'd been called out.
Kat Buckingham was the disputes team's chief investigator. She had to respond to what Mr Livingstone, one of Mr Corbyn's closest colleagues, had said.
I had prepared a suspension letter and was sitting waiting to get it sent, to get it signed off and to get it sent. As the hours went by, just still didn't get the go, didn't get the sign off, and I couldn't understand why. It seemed obvious to me that this would be what we would be doing.
In Mr. Corbyn's office, we've been told, some staff grinned as they watched news of what Ken Livingstone had said. Most thought his comments not that bad. We've also been told a key Corbyn advisor was heard referring to a Jewish conspiracy behind the growing demands for Mr. Livingstone's suspension. The Labour Party say this account is completely false.
You know nothing about it. You know nothing about what Hitler did in 1930.
Labour MP John Mann laid into Ken Livingstone for his crank history. It was the first of Labour's many public car crashes over anti-Semitism.
You've lost it, mate. You need help.
Mr. Livingstone was invited to attend a formal interview with the disputes team at Party HQ.
Did you get the sense he was taking it seriously?
Not at all. He signed the sign-in book at the party as visiting the torture chamber. He had the opportunity to express regret should he have felt regret.
Did he?
No, he was extremely careful to not apologise for any of the statements that he had repeatedly made.
A year later, Ken Livingstone was brought before Labour's highest disciplinary body, the National Constitutional Committee, or NCC. The charge, bringing the party into disrepute. By then, there was a new chief investigator, Sam Matthews. He saw the Livingstone case as a litmus test.
Ken Livingstone was given a 2-year suspension by the NCC. Did you think that was a fitting penalty for what he'd said?
No, not at all.
Why?
What the NCC did in finding the charges proven but giving a 2-year suspension was essentially saying, yes, we acknowledge that what you've said is anti-Semitic, we just don't care that much. You can be back in within 2 years. That's an outrage. That's not zero tolerance. It's not even close to zero tolerance. These views have absolutely no place in the Labour Party, whoever says them.
Jeremy Corbyn refused to be interviewed for this programme. The Shadow Communities Secretary, Andrew Gwynn, was sent in his place.
All of our questions have been directed to the leader of the Labour Party and key advisers in his office, none of whom have agreed to be questioned. And you have been sent. Why are they not sitting where you're sitting?
Well, I think it's important that somebody from the Labour Party is here to make it very clear on behalf of the entire Shadow Cabinet. We will do all we can to make it very clear to anybody who thinks that they can have those abhorrent views in our party and in our family that they are not welcome.
I'm Izzy Lenger. I joined the Labour Party in 2015. The anti-Semitic abuse I received was what I was subjected to every single day. Telling me Hitler was right, telling me Hitler did not go far enough. In Labour Party meetings, we've seen people engage in Holocaust denial, and that's terrifying for Jewish members. It absolutely breaks my heart to say, but I do not think the Labour Party is a safe space for Jewish people anymore.
Jeremy Corbyn has won more than 50% of the votes cast in this round, and I'm therefore delighted to declare Jeremy Corbyn elected as leader of the Labour Party.
Before Jeremy Corbyn was elected Labour leader in 2015, complaints in the party about anti-Semitism were rare.
Complaints relating to anything were fairly low. At the time, we probably had 3, 4, 5 members in that unit, but they're mainly dealing with compliance issues.
We began, when I started that role, having a manageable workload, some serious cases, but it was all within my capacity.
After Mr. Corbyn became leader, party membership surged, some attracted by his decades of radical left activism.
So there's an increase in members from a particular perspective, and they brought with them a particular worldview, which unfortunately allowed breathing space for anti-Semitism to arise.
This is about the creation of a culture within the Labour Party that makes anti-Semites feel that it's their political home.
We want a world where there is unity and peace, not racism, xenophobia, poverty and division. Thank you very much.
For many people on the left, they define themselves by being anti-racist. And actually they define the right as being racist. So in their world, they can't be anti-Semitic because they are left-wing.
For Jeremy Corbyn and those who share his worldview, part of being anti-racist is near unconditional support for the Palestinian cause.
In our thousands, in our millions, we are all Palestinians. Free Palestine!
Yet, the campaign for Palestinian rights can blind some anti-racists to another kind of racism against Jews.
If you look back at the kind of anti-Semitism that existed in the 1930s, Jews using their money, Jews controlling governments, but instead you started to see the same ideas but being directed towards Israel. These kind of ideas are much more acceptable on the left and in pro-Palestinian campaigning circles because they talk about Israel. They don't talk about Jews, but actually underneath the surface, it's the same ideas.
Alan Johnson, a lifelong Labour Party member and historian, has campaigned against anti-Semitism on the left since the 1980s.
It's completely possible to criticise Israel within the Labour Party and not come near an anti-Semitism charge. You can say the occupation is wrong, you can say the settlements are wrong, you can say that the treatment of the Arab minority is discriminatory, but if you say Israel is an inherently racist endeavour that should therefore be abolished, that's something different.
For the cause of Palestinian rights, Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Corbyn's office argues that the idea of peacefully replacing the world's only Jewish state with a single Israeli-Palestinian one is not anti-Semitic. However, Mr. Corbyn has sometimes shared platforms with Palestinian groups like Hamas and its supporters who want Israel to be dismantled, but by force.
If they deny your life, explode in their faces. It will be jihad, jihad, and jihad until Palestine is free. Assalamu alaikum.
Mr. Corbyn has said that Hamas represents a future for peace and justice in the Middle East.
The idea that an organisation that is dedicated towards the good of the Palestinian people should be labelled as a terrorist organisation by the British government is really a big, big historical mistake.
Jeremy has a long and principled record of solidarity with the Palestinian people. It is false to claim that he is associated with extremist groups.
My name's Rachel. I've been a member of the Labour Party since I was 17, so that's 9 years at this point. Obviously, there were some real atrocities being done by the current Israeli government, and I've seen, Jewish friends in the Labour Party feel completely held to account for that. You know, my Jewish friends will tweet about stuff that's nothing to do with Israel or being Jewish or anything, and have responses being like, well, what about Palestinians? Don't you care about the Palestinians? Which of course they do. Quite frankly, my Jewish friends don't feel safe or welcome in the Labour Party.
All his political life, Mr. Corbyn's worldview has been on the fringe of the Labour movement. Now, as leader, that fringe was becoming the mainstream.
Welcome all our new members. More than 160,000 have joined the Labour Party.
Complaints about anti-Semitism began to surface. Corbyn loyalists dismissed them as smears, a plot to undermine the party's new left-wing leadership.
It was huge. The problem was massive, and it absolutely wasn't constructed by embittered old Blairites, as we were frequently described as. It was real. It still is real.
Were you all Blairites?
No, absolutely not. It would make no difference. We had standards, we had clear rules that we had to try and uphold.
It didn't help our national security that at the same time, some years ago...
Lifelong Marxists were now joining the party, clashing with the traditional centre-left of Brown and Blair, now fading into history.
The environment was extremely hostile. We had what was akin to a civil war in the party, and our role was to try and bring some civility back into the proceedings. The civil war between members and new members was just unbelievable. It went a mushroom cloud of abuse, and it wasn't pleasant for anyone.
Let us build a kinder politics, a more caring society together. Let's put our values, the people's values, back into politics. Conference, thank you.
And of course, we were promised a kinder, gentler politics, I think, weren't we?
That's right. It was not my experience.
Yeah, it's been a really nasty experience as a Jew in the Labour Party. A party member posted online comments saying that Israel was responsible for the creation of ISIS and also for 9/11. And then I saw the individual at party conference, and I was absolutely horrified that nothing had been done. I'd really like Jeremy Corbyn to show leadership on this issue.
It's not a crisis. There's no crisis. I have been an anti-racist campaigner all my life. The number of cases is very, very small indeed.
But complaints were growing and beginning to seriously undermine the party's anti-racist credentials. Mr. Corbyn's closest political advisor, Seamus Milne, sought advice from Mike Crichton.
He said, I want to talk to you about anti-Semitism, how we deal with it. And I gave him my advice, which, as I recall, was two things. One was we should deal with some of the top-level anti-Semitic cases much more swiftly and much more robustly. Second thing I suggested was that it would be the right time for Jeremy Corbyn, as leader, to make a significant speech on the issue of the Middle East, particularly saying that Israel had a right to exist.
And when you made this suggestion to Mr. Milne, what was his response?
He laughed at me.
He laughed at you?
He actually laughed at me. No, I mean, I'd clearly misread it. I thought he actually wanted to know how we tackle anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. I think what he actually meant to say was, how do we deal with the bad publicity we're getting?
The Labour Party dispute this conversation ever took place. This allegation is false and malicious. Jeremy Corbyn has repeatedly expressed his support for Israel's right to exist and for a two-state solution, so there is no reason whatever to laugh at any such suggestion.
For 22 years, Liverpool's Riverside constituency has had a Jewish MP. In the wake of Mr. Corbyn's election as party leader, there was an influx of new members. Some wanted her out. Party meetings descended into chaos. Ben Westerman was dispatched to investigate.
The Riverside investigation really took on a life of its own. It was a very big investigation. Lots of complaints. These all featured anti-Semitism, but also included bullying, harassment, generally unpleasant behaviour towards each other at party meetings, uncomradely behaviour as the party rulebook defines it. So we opened a full investigation into that constituency party.
Ben Westerman was the only Jewish member
of the disputes team.
Coming from a family with a history of oppression because they were Jews, I thought this was intolerable, and at this point it looked like it could be stopped.
Westerman discovered that the word Zionism had been weaponized into a term of abuse.
Zionists are targets and deserve to feel uncomfortable. Every Jew is a Zio-fascist.
Israel has no right to exist.
These attacks offended Jewish members because Zionism is the movement that established Israel as a secure Jewish homeland after centuries of persecution.
The left always thinks of itself as anti-racist, but all you do is you swap in the word Zionist instead of Jewish, or Israeli instead of Jewish, and suddenly the language is cleansed. It's acceptable on the left.
Much of the vitriol was aimed at Riverside's Jewish MP, Louise Ellman.
Well, I came wanting to talk about health service, transport, public services, jobs and employment, and they wanted to talk mainly about the Middle East and particularly about the Israeli-Palestinian issue. It became extremely unpleasant. People would leave the meeting in tears.
Ben Westerman received dozens of complaints. While interviewing one member, he was confronted with the very anti-Semitism he'd been investigating.
And we finished the interview. The person got up to leave the room and then turned back to me and said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "What do you mean, where am I from?" And she said, "I asked you, where are you from?" And I said, "I'm not prepared to discuss this." And they said, "Are you from Israel?" What can you say to that? You are assumed to be in cahoots with the Israeli government. It's this obsession with that just spills over all the time into anti-Semitism.
Ben Westerman's report didn't result in any individuals being punished, but the Labour Party did change the rules about how constituency meetings were run.
It's different today. I don't get the same harassment, I don't get the same interrogation, but the hostility is still there.
I first voted for Corbyn as leader in 2015. I was 20 years old. I may only be 4 years older now, but I definitely feel like I know an awful lot more. I've been active in the party pretty much for my entire life. I've noticed it descend into a really very unpleasant and at times hostile environment. And they might not call me a dirty Jew, but they'll call me a dirty Zionist with pride.
In early 2018, the disputes investigation team was joined by a young Labour member fresh out of university. Am I right, you voted for Jeremy Corbyn?
I did in 2015 quite happily, and when I started working for the party in London, I think that kind of sense of him coming in and being this great progressive leader who was going to change British politics, I think that had kind of worn off a bit.
As had some of the sheen from Mr. Corbyn's reputation as a lifelong anti-racist campaigner. 6 years earlier, there had been a dispute over this mural in East London. Here, the artist described the mural's message.
I came to paint a mural that depicted the elite banker cartel, known as the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Morgans, the ruling class elite few, the Wizards of Oz. They would be playing a board game of Monopoly on the backs of the working class.
The mural is a conspiracy theory through art. Some of the rich old white men, these rich bankers exploiting the workers, were drawn to be Jewish. How were they drawn to be Jewish? The artist gave them big noses. I mean, this is not subtle stuff.
Following complaints, the local council planned to paint over the mural. On the artist's Facebook page, Mr. Corbyn leapt to his defence. Why, he wrote, protesting against the mural's destruction.
If it was a member of the public who perhaps wasn't that political, wasn't aware of that kind of thing, I can see how a mistake could be made, but I don't believe that Jeremy Corbyn has any such excuse, because, as he says or likes to repeat, constantly, he is this lifelong anti-racist who should be able to spot anti-Semitic tropes when he sees them.
When his defence of the mural became public in 2018, Mr. Corbyn apologised, saying he hadn't noticed it was anti-Semitic because he hadn't looked closely enough.
I received some really hurtful comments. I've seen friends of mine being reduced to tears. When I see or hear anything anti-Semitic in a party meeting, it scares me that no one else might speak out about it. I think the leadership either don't know how to engage fully with the topic or don't want to at all.
Mr. Corbyn and his office have repeatedly said that when party members are accused of anti-Semitism, they don't interfere in the disciplinary process. Indeed, the Labour Party said any such suggestion is categorically untrue. But that doesn't seem to be the case. In an email, Mr. Corbyn's Director of Communications, Seamus Milne, asked for a review of the disciplinary process into anti-Semitic complaints. There was a risk, he said, of muddling up political disputes with racism. The Labour Party told us this was not a request for any kind of formal review. How did you interpret that email from Mr. Milne?
The same way that all staff in Labour's head office did, which is that this was the leader's office requesting to be involved directly in the disciplinary process. This is not a helpful suggestion, it is an instruction.
But it's framed as a suggestion.
Yes, it's all framed as a suggestion, but this is not some junior staff at the leader's office. This is Seamus Milne, Director of Communications, part of Jeremy Corbyn's inner circle. He is probably one of, if not the most influential person within the leader's office. And in that context, when he says, I think we need to review this process going forward, that isn't a suggestion. That's him instructing what he expects to happen without needing to say it.
The leader's office did not intervene. These former disaffected employees sought the view of staff in the leader's office, which was complied with in good faith. These disaffected former officials include those who have always opposed Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, worked to actively undermine it, and have both personal and political axes to grind.
At Labour HQ, the atmosphere was becoming distinctly chilly for the disputes team.
We had a really good team. We worked really closely together. We were all we all became friends through doing that job. But there was an increasing darkness.
Like his colleagues, Dan Hogan was having to adjust to the arrival of a new boss.
It became very apparent over the course of a few months that the leader's office and Jenny Formby and her team wanted us out.
Jenny Formby, their new boss, was a long-time Corbyn ally, now appointed General Secretary of the Labour Party.
She said that, quote, tackling anti-Semitism in the party is a central priority.
It's a joke. On a number of cases which I worked on, the people that she brought in when she became General Secretary overruled us and downgraded what should have been a suspension to just an investigation, or worse, to just a reminder of conduct, effectively a slap on the wrist.
One of Jenny Formby's people was a local councillor and loyal Corbyn supporter.
Point of order, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Gardner, do speak up.
Amendments to the council tax setting can be made in writing.
We've been told that within days, Thomas Gardner was given a veto over which anti-Semitism complaints should be investigated. This email, circulated by Mr. Corbyn's Chief of Staff to his key advisers, proposes giving Thomas Gardner political oversight over anti-Semitism complaints. The Labour Party told us the email was never sent to Mr. Gardner.
The Labour Party say any suggestion that Thomas Gardner was their political overseer is, and I quote, a malicious political attack on a party staff member by a disaffected, politically hostile former employee. But political overseer was how the staff saw him.
Thomas Gardner was, to all intents and purposes, the leader's office on a representative in head office. He wasn't working there, but he was carrying out their orders.
Mr. Gardner wasn't short of work. In May last year, a complaint was submitted about this image, which had been posted online by a party member from Liverpool.
This was an image of an alien creature clamped onto the Statue of Liberty, the symbol of American freedom, with a big Star of David on its back. The same Star of David that you see on Jewish prayer books, you see on the walls of synagogues that Jewish people wear, on jewellery. And the meaning of this image is that Jews are an alien creature sucking the life out of America. It's an image that belonged in 1930s Germany.
It was such a shocking image, and to me and to most of us was so clearly anti-Semitic.
But not, apparently, to the disputes team's new boss, Thomas Gardner.
You know, a lot of the time he would bring up Israel and say, well, actually, no, I don't believe this is anti-Semitic. I believe this is, you know, anti-Israeli or, you know, anti the state of Israel.
The image had been posted by this woman, Kayla Bibby. She described it as the most accurate photo I've seen all year. The complaint had been made by Ms. Bibby's MP, Louise Ellman. But Thomas Gardner refused to suspend Ms. Bibby against the recommendation of the disputes team.
Well, that decision is absolutely appalling. And that image screams out, this is anti-Semitism. Well, she should have either been expelled or immediately suspended and then expelled after that.
The disputes team continued their own inquiries and learned that the image was from a far-right website and was captioned, "Blood-sucking alien parasites killing America."
Kayla Bibby says she regrets any offence caused. Following an outcry over the original decisions, she is now suspended from the party. But the case highlighted the growing schism between what the disputes team regarded as anti-Semitic and what Thomas Gardner and those in the leader's office thought.
It was often just spending day after day reading anti-Semitic comments that were made by Labour members. Then I would process them and I would pass them on, often to then be given a disappointing answer from Thomas. He did suspend members and he did issue notices of investigation, but there should have been more suspensions. It just became so demoralising.
What was it like for you, the head of the unit, to have this man overseeing your work?
It was awful. It made it impossible for me to do that job in the way that that job has always been done previously. That is probably the most obvious example of how Jenny created an environment and a culture that was toxic for me and my team.
It is unfair to attack staff members who cannot publicly defend themselves. It is simply untrue to say that there were any significant number of disagreements about what constituted anti-Semitism.
Until 2016, being Jewish was either a neutral thing or it was a positive thing. People would celebrate diversity. That changed decisively in my personal experience in 2016, when a local member who I'd sat with in meetings for 5 years, sometimes it was a bit objectionable but never racist, compared me to a Nazi in the local newspaper. Labour isn't now an anti-racist party, and that's the sad truth of it.
I'm very clear. I'm not tolerating any anti-Semitism in our party. We will not tolerate anti-Semitism in any form whatsoever.
However, we can reveal that a month after Mr. Corbyn's solemn zero-tolerance pledge, his office in Parliament and Labour's new General Secretary here were working to extend their political influence beyond the disputes team.
So I'm Jackie Walker.
Jackie Walker was a long-standing anti-racist ally of Mr. Corbyn. She seems to have had a blind spot when it came to anti-Semitism and had been the subject of a number of complaints. The disputes team asked Louise Withers-Green to interview Miss Walker. What was the charge that the disputes team was bringing against Jackie Walker?
Jackie Walker had said a number of very offensive things. She said that the Jews were financiers of the slave trade. She suggested that Jews were unwelcoming to black people and repeatedly reiterated tropes about Jews having undue power and influence. She showed absolutely no contrition or remorse for the things that she had said.
The complaint against Jackie Walker had been sent up to the Labour Party's National Constitutional Committee, or NCC, the body that has the final say over expulsions. Lord McNichol used to be the Labour Party's General Secretary.
The NCC has been and should be completely independent from the Leader's office or from the General Secretary's office. It is a committee in its own right to make the decisions based on the facts and the evidence of a case.
And that's why the independence of the NCC is critical.
Yeah, and it's why it stood the test of time.
Ms. Walker was now at risk of being kicked out. On the 5th of May 2018, Mr. Corbyn's closest advisers discussed how they might exercise some control over the NCC. This email chain, which includes some of Mr. Corbyn's closest advisers, reveals what appears to have been an attempt to interfere with the selection of the NCC panel hearing the Jackie Walker case. One message from the General Secretary, Jenny Formby, says, and I quote, "The NCC cannot be allowed to continue in the way that they are at the moment, and I will also be challenging the panel for the Jackie Walker case." So if you, when you were General Secretary, had been asked to talk to the NCC chair and say, you know what, we've got this anti-Semitism case coming up, I don't want those panellists, I want these panellists.
I wouldn't.
You wouldn't?
I wouldn't, no.
Under any circumstances?
That's not the role of the no. That's not the way that the rule book was created. Either the spirit or the letter of it. The emails that you've shown me are really important. The issues that are raised within them should ring alarm bells across the party. To try to interfere politically within the NCC is just wrong.
That's something that, as leader, Mr. Corbyn should have known and acted on. because this entire email chain was copied to his private email address.
The emails are simply about ensuring the NCC is held accountable for the length of time they take to hear cases, and about protecting the party against any successful legal challenge on the basis of perceived bias if the same panel is used in high-profile cases.
It's not clear what came of these discussions. When Jackie Walker's case eventually came before the NCC earlier this year, they did expel her. What Miss Formby's email does suggest is that she knew that what was being contemplated was dubious.
I've permanently deleted all trace of the email. Too many eyes still on my Labour address.
The Labour Party told us that Jenny Formby temporarily stopped using her party email because of concerns a political opponent had access to it. But Mr. Corbyn's office have been directly involved in investigating individual anti-Semitism complaints. I've been told that last summer there was a secret instruction from the leader's office to transfer batches of anti-Semitism complaints files by hand from party headquarters here to the leader's office half a mile down the road in Parliament for assessment by his aides, flatly contradicting, once again, Mr. Corbyn's insistence that the complaints process is wholly independent of his office.
It has always been the case that the Labour Party, like any organisation, occasionally seconds staff to do alternative work where there are capacity issues. This in no way contradicts the party's position that the complaints process operates independently of the leader's office.
People were posting Nazi and openly anti-Semitic material from conspiracy websites on the constituency party Facebook's page. We are very frightened of what Corbyn might do because we have seen these behaviours before. We know what happens when people don't speak up against things that are patently wrong. Zero tolerance just doesn't apply for hatred towards Jewish people. I think that sends a very clear signal to Jewish members of the party. You're not really welcome here. Please leave.
We've been told that by last spring, there were still several hundred anti-Semitism cases waiting to be resolved. Now, the Labour Party won't give us precise figures, although they do acknowledge the numbers have increased, but they also say they're getting through them 4 times faster. However, we understand that by spring, 3 years into this crisis, the actual number of members who'd been expelled stood at only around 15.
That was a figure that really shocked and upset me when I read it. I think I actually was brought to tears of anger and frustration, because it was just horrifying to hear that all the work I'd tried to do had essentially been for nothing.
We put the numbers of those expelled to Andrew Gwynn, the Shadow Communities Secretary.
Do you regard 15 expulsions of anti-Semites in a crisis that's been running over 3 years as evidence of having dealt with this crisis?
Well, of course, there are lots of cases that are ongoing as well. And of course, there are many members who, going through disciplinary processes, when you are faced with possible expulsion, actually then leave the party before.
Is 15 evidence of a party which says it is serious about dealing with anti-Semitism?
Well, 15 fewer racists and people who hold obnoxious views, I think, is important. But the point is, we are serious about getting shot of this problem.
It's my responsibility to root out anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. I want to make it clear that any government I lead will take whatever measures are necessary to support and guarantee the security of all Jewish communities and their culture.
Jeremy Corbyn has had multiple opportunities to deliver on that firm pledge over the last 3 years. In June 2016, the Labour Party published a report from the human rights lawyer Shami Chakrabarti. Labour says it was a thorough investigation which produced recommendations to make the procedures fairer, swifter and more robust. The disputes team saw it differently.
It was so poorly researched. She missed the opportunity to properly engage with the community. She didn't make any decent recommendations on dealing with anti-Semitism. Pitiful is the right word. I really found it impossibly disappointing.
One recommendation Ms. Chakrabarti did make was to emphasise that people shouldn't necessarily be judged by the company they keep. Just as well for Mr. Corbyn.
Shami's report was written in such a way that she had drawn specific red lines of past history.
And platform sharing, which of course is a very major feature of Mr. Corbyn's past, was one of those areas that she avoided.
For someone who insists he's such a principled anti-racist and he always opposes anti-Semitism, it is extraordinary the number of times he finds himself alongside people who have a record of expressing views or doing things that are completely the opposite of the anti-racism he claims.
In 2012, Mr. Corbyn campaigned to allow a notoriously anti-Semitic preacher activist into Britain. Raed Salah had called Jews the germs of all time and blamed them for 9/11.
And I hereby renew my invitation to Sheikh Salah to come to Parliament, meet with me, meet with my colleagues, and you will be assured of a very warm welcome, and I look forward to giving you tea on the terrace, because you deserve it.
At the time, people were pointing out to him all the anti-Semitic speeches and sermons that Salah gave. You know what his response was? He didn't say anything like that to me. Now, hold on. Can we possibly imagine a leader of the Labour Party inviting an anti-black racist to have tea on the terrace of the House of Commons, and then other party members say, but hold on, Jeremy, look at this terrible racist statements he's made. And the leader doesn't really look, but then says, well, he didn't say anything like that to me.
Morning, Jeremy. Morning, you're right. Hi.
More recently, Mr. Corbyn has apologised for what he says are occasional appearances on platforms with, and I quote, people whose views I completely reject.
Either he's just the unluckiest anti-racist in history, that he always, by accident, ends up on these platforms with these people, or he's there because he shares their political world. He shares their views. They're on a platform together because they have some kind of political connection.
Jeremy Corbyn's record on opposing anti-Semitism goes back decades. He has proactively addressed anti-Semitism within the party, in direct communications to the party membership, in articles, speeches, videos and interviews.
Modern-day anti-Semitism has its origins in centuries-old conspiracy theories.
The core demonology is that Jews are essentially different from non-Jews, and the difference is that they're malign, powerful, and tricksy. Always tricksy, behind the scenes, pulling the strings. Their power is always shrouded and hidden. The New Left tended to have its own form of this anti-Semitism, which was that the Jews were the arch-imperialist power. And this is what's filtered through into the present-day Labour Party.
Morning, Mr. Corbyn.
Jeremy Corbyn has himself engaged in a conspiracy theory about Israel. In 2012, 16 Egyptian border guards were murdered. As the BBC reported at the time, the Egyptian government was clear jihadists were to blame.
In the past year, there's been growing concern that Islamist militants have gained a foothold in this restive region.
Despite all this, a week later, on Iranian state TV, Mr. Corbyn turned up with his own highly conspiratorial interpretation of the facts.
You have to look at the big picture. In whose interests is it to destabilise the new government in Egypt? In whose interests is it to kill Egyptians other than Israel? I suspect the hand of Israel in this whole process of destabilisation.
Jeremy Corbyn's speculation about the perpetrators of attacks on Egyptian border guards was based on previous well-documented incidents of killings of Egyptian forces by the Israeli military.
If Jeremy Corbyn kept the company today that he kept before he became leader, associated with the kind of extremists that he did before he became leader, would he survive a disciplinary inquiry?
If he was an ordinary member of the Labour Party, no. I don't think he would survive a disciplinary hearing. I think he would be expelled.
This is offensive nonsense. Jeremy Corbyn was subject to the same rules as everyone else. He has not done or said anything that constitutes a breach of the party's rulebook.
We feel like we don't belong here, and we have to do far more than anybody else to be accepted. A year ago, a member of the Labour Party decided to do a video just about me, a 45-minute video, where he started, excuse my French, saying that I was a fucking Jew. One day someone told me I was a pig, a Jewish pig. Do you feel that they single you out just because of being Jewish?
Last August, Mr. Corbyn acknowledged that Labour could have handled its anti-Semitism crisis better.
We have been too slow in processing disciplinary cases. People who use anti-Semitic poison need to understand you do not do it in my name or the name of my party. You are not our supporters.
The rhetoric is impassioned, but many members are no longer convinced.
I'm still a member, but I don't think I'll be a member if the party doesn't get a grip on anti-Semitism. See, I'm someone who for 2.5 years or more has been saying to other people, look, let's give him space. And I just don't anymore. I just don't think there's been enough action. I think there's been lying that's gone on about the integrity of the processes. I think there's been intervention by his own office, and he said there wasn't any intervention by his own office. I remain to be convinced that he's really grasped the nettle of anti-Semitism in the party.
We've spoken to more than 20 Labour Party officials, including many of those at party headquarters employed to deal with anti-Semitism. One by one, they left, with Kat Buckingham the first of the disputes team to go in December 2016.
I was stuck between an angry and obstructive leader's office and an arcane disciplinary system. And I couldn't stop the problem. I couldn't hold the tide. And I felt so powerless, and I felt guilty, and I felt like I'd failed. And yeah, I had a breakdown.
Did you?
Yeah, I quit the party with nowhere to go, and yeah, I had a breakdown. It was too much pain from too many people.
Right.
Not just personal. It was I felt keenly that there was a huge community impact. People felt it was okay to make people feel unwelcome in their community. It's not okay.
For Kat Buckingham's successor, things got even worse as Corbyn loyalists tightened their grip on the party.
There were elements among certainly in the leader's office, that regarded us and our team as Blairites who are working to undermine the leader of the Labour Party. And now suddenly our boss is someone who has openly accused members of my team of being politically motivated, of not investigating complaints against Blairites, but investigating complaints against supporters of Jeremy. And this all created an environment and a culture that meant that the mental health of me and my team went through the floor.
I resigned my membership in around the middle of 2017. Not because of any particular case, just because I was sick of reading about it. I felt that I had tried as hard as I possibly could to do my bit to fight this sickness, and to me it's getting worse.
I knew the atmosphere was bad, and I knew it was bad, but it just kept sort of building up and up. It was, I felt a bit complicit, actually.
In what?
In the Labour Party not dealing with anti-Semitism properly. I was signed off with depression and anxiety by my doctor because I literally couldn't go in there anymore.
In return for not having to work her notice period, Louise Withers-Green, like some others in the disputes team, was told she'd have to sign a non-disclosure agreement.
It was really tight. When I first read it, I wondered how on earth I'd be able to apply for jobs, because it was so prescriptive in not speaking about anything that I had heard of or happening in the Labour Party. But I won't be able to live with myself unless I speak up about the horrendous things that I know have been happening.
2 months after Jenny Formby arrived as General Secretary, Sam Matthews was signed off sick.
I sat at my desk thinking, I can't do this anymore. I'm being asked to do things I'm fundamentally not comfortable with. The General Secretary doesn't listen to me, and the thought crosses my mind as to whether I send her my resignation and then do something that nobody should ever consider. And that I actively considered committing suicide. Walking off her roof, she has a balcony outside her office, as some way to not feel trapped anymore.
Our next Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn.
The party, which under Jeremy Corbyn boasts of being anti-racist to its core, is now the subject of a statutory inquiry by the Equalities Commission into whether it has become institutionally racist.
Do you think Mr. Corbyn is anti-Semitic?
I've been asked that a number of times, and you can tell from my pause that it's still a question I struggle with.
I don't believe that Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic. I know Jeremy, I've known him for 14 years, and he is a passionate believer in equality, in ensuring that hatred and intolerance in wherever it manifests itself is tackled and is challenged. And so, no, I don't believe that Jeremy is anti-Semitic.
The row over anti-Semitism has caused immense hurt and anxiety in the Jewish community, and great dismay in the Labour Party. But I hope and believe we can work together to draw a line under it. And with your help, I will fight for that with every breath that I possess.
Notions about Jews, their supposed power, their hidden influence and malign intent have surfaced within Labour as never before. If not Mr. Corbyn, who, in the party, has the leadership to bury them?